This video demonstrates how to create scenarios, one variable data table, two variable data tables, pivot table, how to edit the value field settings, create pivot charts, how to insert a slicer to add calculated fields, and then it wraps up with some formatting strategies. That is, you format your pivot table, your pivot chart, the slicer, and refresh your pivot table. I'm working off Guided Project 8-2 from your book. This is on E8-471. This sample is quite similar to what you'll have to do on your independent project 8-5. So let's get started. In this example, we have Sierra Pacific Community College, SPCC. They're requesting a decision analysis from you on imported data using a one variable data table to determine an investment payout if the interest rate changes. So if the interest rate were to change, what can you expect in terms of a payout? This is a what if analysis. So first I'm going to create the scenarios, and this is, like I said, similar to the IP 8-5. Click on the data tab, go to forecast, you have what if analysis, select scenario manager, then you click add, and for the first scenario I'm going to call this original term. As a matter of fact, you can also I can call it original split, but I'm going to stick with Guided Project 8-2 and call it original term. The changing cells will be G4 because we're interested in the term. So select the arrow, the reference G4, and then click OK. And we're not going to change the term because this is the original term. So select OK again, and I'm going to add a second scenario. And this again copies what you have on Independent Project 8-5. You don't have to change the first values. So I'm going to select add, and here I'm going to call this longer term. All right, so G4, the changing cell remains the same. I'm going to select OK, but here I'm going to change the type to 20 years. Select OK. I'm going to add a third scenario, so click add, and for the third scenario I'm going to add shorter term, changing values, dollar box remains the same, but in the scenario values I'm going to change that to 7, and I pressed enter, and then I'm just going to close this. So what you have now are your three scenarios. Okay, so I'm going to close that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to display the scenario for shorter term, and this goes along with 3D on your independent project 8-5. So I'm going to go back to data, what if, scenario manager, and I'm interested in displaying the shorter term, and when I hit show, it's going to show what the value would be for the shorter term. So select show, and the what if analysis, it adjusts accordingly. So I'm going to select close, and now I'm going to create my one variable data table, which is going to give me a view of what will happen or what I can expect in terms of a payout based on different various annual percentage rates. Now in your project, these values are already created for you, but here I'm just going to select B14 and B15 and just fill this. Okay, and then I'm going to select C13, and in here I'm going to put an equal sign and select G5 because I'm interested in the payment as my reference. So press enter. Now to create the one data variable table, I'm going to start by selecting the range B13 down to C22. I'll select data, what if analysis, data table, and I'm interested in the column input is what's really driving this analysis, right? So for my column input, I'm going to click on D as in David 8 as the replacement for the values in here, and select OK, and here's my one variable data table. Just going to make a little bit of adjustment. I'm going to select the data, go to the Home tab, have this centered, and make this currency with 2 decimal places. Looks a whole lot better. So let's create the 2 variable data table. And this goes to number 5 on your independent project 8-5. Okay. All right, so we'll start by selecting E13. And in here, I'm going to create a reference to the total cost of the loan formula. So in here, I'll just go with an equal sign. And I'm looking for G8, which is the total cost of the loan. I'm going to press enter. All right, so now I'm going to build the 2 variable data table by selecting E13 all the way down to I22. All right, so again, I'll go to the data tab, what if analysis, select the data table. Now in here, for the row input cell, and again, if you're following along, looking at your independent project 8-5, the equivalent would be number 5A. I've just completed, and then you'll be on number 5B to complete the second half of the 2 variable data table. So for my row input, I'm going to select G4. Okay, and for my column, I'm going to select D as in David 8. Okay, so G4 represents the term of the loan in years, and D8 represents the APR. All right, so I'll click OK, and here's my 2 variable data table. All right, again, let's just tidy this up a bit. So Home tab, have this centered, and we can turn this into a currency. And a fast way to turn this thing into a currency without clicking is Control Shift and the $sign. Once you have your data selected, it's Control Shift and $sign. Okay. All right. So moving right along, we're going to create a pivot table. So now if you're following along and you're keeping track with your independent project, this would be number 6 on your independent project. All right, so to create the pivot table, I'm going to switch to the CC location sheet. And in here, I'll just select the data. To create a pivot table, you need to select your data. So here I'm going to select my data to create my pivot table. All right, which is A4 to E7. And then I'll go to the Insert tab, Pivot Table, and I want my pivot table created on a new worksheet. So just leave it as it is, select OK. There's the pivot table. First thing you need to do is to rename the pivot table. Very important. I'm going to rename that to Pivot Table. Press Enter. And to rename, you right click, go to Rename, and you rename your pivot table. Okay. So next, following along, I'm on the guided project. I'm now on E8473, and I'm on number 8. I'm on number 8, letter F, So in the pivot table, I'm going to check the student tuition categories. Okay, in addition to that, I'm going to check, and that goes as my row headings. And now I'm going to add the values to that, which is quarter 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and if you're following along with your IP project, this is the equivalent to number 6B as in boy. Now on number 7 in your IP project, it asks you to create a second copy of the list price field. Okay, so I'm going to do the exact same thing over here. I'm just going to create a second copy of, let's just say, the sum of quarter. I'm going to create a second copy. So if you're outside the pivot table, make sure you click inside the pivot table to bring up the pivot table fields. Select, here I'm going to select quarter 4, and it's going to create a second copy of it. That's how you create a second copy. Okay. All right, so moving right along, I've created my second copy. Now I'm going to edit the name of the second copy. So I'm just going to click on the pivot table. I can go to Analyze, and in the field settings, I'm going to change that to percentage of Q4 total. Okay, now in your project, it's called average list price. That's 7A, and this is how you complete 7A. All right, so it changes to percentage of Q4 total. All right, so moving right along, let's go ahead and apply the currency format. So I'm just going to select the columns and apply the currency format with 0 decimals. Okay. And now that I have this formatted, let's see, I'm going to create the pivot chart. So on the IP project, that's number 8. So I'm going to create the pivot chart. So I'm going to click inside my pivot table, go to Insert, and under the charts group, I'm going to select pivot chart, and I'm going to create a clustered column. Just select OK. And there you have the custom column. I'm just going to drag this, try to keep it in line with what you're doing on your IP project. So that's the custom, the clustered column. All right, so let's see what else we can do on this guided project that's similar to what you're doing on your IP project. So on number 9 in your IP project, it asks you to edit one of the records. So I'm just going to go over to my CC location, and I'm going to edit this record, changing this from transfer to let's just call it online campus as well. Online, press enter. Go back to my pivot table, and I'm going to refresh the pivot table, and there you can see now it's taken the value of online and factored it into the online that I had before. So that's equivalent to number 9 on your independent project. All right. So on number 10 on your independent project, let's see if we can insert a field called average offer. But in here, I'm just going to insert a calculated field. So first, let me do it based on how it is done on the guided project, and then we'll come back and we'll do it on the IP project. Okay, so make sure you have your pivot table activated by clicking any cell in the pivot table. All right, so on the Analyze tab, look under the Calculations, look for Fields, Items, and Sets. Click on that, select Calculated Field. All right, and in the Insert Calculated Field dialog box, I'm going to type target use. And in the formula box, I'm just going to remove the 0, leave the equal sign, leave a space after the equal sign as well. Double click on Q4 to bring that in with a single quote. And I'm going to put in a multiplication because I want that to be 115%. This is exactly what you'll do number 10 in your independent project as well. All right. So then I'm going to click OK, and the field is added. Okay. So the rest, as a matter of fact, let's just go ahead and add the slicer. Let me add the slicer in here, and to just make sure you don't run into any issues understanding how to add slicers. So that'll be number 11 on your independent project. So to insert the slicer, you have to make sure your pivot table is activated. All right, then under the Analyze tab in the Filter group, select Insert Slicer. And I'm going to check Student Tuition Categories. On the independent project, you'll be selecting counties. Okay. So Student Tuition Categories, and I'll click OK. And here's my slicer. I'm just going to move it to the left, just how you have it in your project. And then I'll click on Online just to display the online totals in a slicer. And again, just how you have your project, I'm going to do a little bit of resizing. And when you have the crosshair, you can move your pivot chart, same thing. You can move your pivot chart, your slicer, once you have the crosshair. And I'm just going to position it, reposition it. All right, so now the rest of it is just simply adding a little bit of styles. You can click I'm going to click the pivot table itself, select Design, and I'm going to come in here and select Pivot Style Medium 16 to change the pivot table. I'm going to go ahead and change the styling for the pivot chart as well. So I'm going to go into Design, and I'm going to select Style 12, and I'm going to change the colors. Let's go to monochromatic, and let me select number 5. And you can do the same for the slicer. You can go to Options, select the style for the slicer. Select the style for the slicer. You can set the background any way you like. And when all is said and done, this is what your independent project will look similar to what I have right now. All right, so I hope this helps you with your independent project. Okay? I'm going to try to create another video and at least cover some of the steps in the IP project. So look out for that one as well.